Welcome to Mindfork. I have returned from the dead with a message from beyond the stars. No, in all seriousness, if you want to skip past the semi-pleasantries and get to the meat of this episode, then by all means. If not, let me paint a quick picture. About a month ago, I said that I would be doing 3 theories, one after the other, on Poppy Playtime, and I was going to do that, but releasing alongside their newest and brightest teasers and trailers burnt me out a little, since I had to rewrite all 3 videos several times, including this one, so honestly it's lucky you're even seeing it. But anyway, what I decided to do instead, as you've now seen, is wait for the hype to die down a little. My guess is that since Chapter 4 comes out in January, they're going to release something, maybe a couple somethings, around Christmas or slightly before then. And so, short on time and without a fuller picture of Chapter 4, I'm not going to be talking about Yarnaby and fear that they'll release something that debunks it instantly. We'll wait until it's released for another proper theory. Instead, I'm going to be talking about Ollie. Remember Chapter 3 for Poppy Playtime? No? Well, to remind us all then, we played against our resident sleepy boy, Catnap, until he underwent a very invasive dental appointment that he did not recover from. We've talked about Catnap before, so he's not the subject of today's theory. Today, we're talking about the dentist, the prototype, or Ollie, so some people believe. We find Ollie very early in our descent into Chapter 3, when a mysterious phone starts ringing. A childlike voice is on the other end, guiding us through playcare, giving us tips and tricks on evading Catnap and friends, and otherwise just coaching us through manipulating the entire power grid of the lower facility, which I still think is crazy. And like I mentioned, most people believe Ollie to be the prototype. However, for me, that seems like the most disappointing explanation, because it's the most obvious answer. It's an interesting idea in theory, and might be cool if less emphasis is placed on who Ollie is, and rather why Ollie is doing this to us, but even outside of that, seeing a twist coming is never fun. The best idea, in my own humble opinion, is to have Ollie be a character we've seen before, but has passed under the radar, so to speak, so nobody suspects them. Of course, the problem with doing that is that people like to make shit up. It's a pet peeve of mine that a person will say, so-and-so is confirmed, when really it was just a vague comment set off the cuff amidst a random 4-hour live stream that the creators made, but that's beside the point. What I'm saying is that internet theories have conclusions as precise as a shotgun blast, everyone making their own assumptions and guesses regardless of the evidence. I'm sure there's someone out there that even believes Ollie is Sir Poops-a-lot, so anyone is fair game. Where am I going with this? God, sorry, I got carried away there. The question is there a well-known character in Poppy Playtime, aside from the prototype, that we do not know the fate of and that could theoretically be Ollie? I'm here to tell you that yes, there is. Let me take you back to something Mob Entertainment released about 18 months ago, give or take, on April 23rd, 2023, the restricted restoration.mp4 video. It shows events immediately prior to, during, and after Thomas Clark's procedure, where he's turned into Experiment 1199, the Bron toy. I'll refer to this video as the Bron tape from now on. Now, if you're knee-deep in Poppy Playtime lore, that name, Thomas Clark, should ring a bell. Thomas was a paediatrician at Playcare, and not only was he a paediatrician, he was also the one that found Theo when he was critically injured. That same Theo became Catnap later on. This exact incident is the reason why Theo was used in the Bigger Bodies initiative, and why he sees the prototype as his god. So why does this random dude show up so often amidst Poppy Playtime lore, despite him never having appeared in any of the games? Why is he so important that he gets that much lore dedicated to him? It's because Thomas Clark is Ollie, and I can explain how. When Chapter 2 had concluded and the Chapter 3 teaser was released, a year after that, 3 lore videos were dropped to the Mob Entertainment YouTube channel. The Bron video, which we just talked about, and 2 other ones. These ones. So it should go without saying that these 3 videos were made as lore-soaked teasers for Chapter 3. The only problem is that out of those 3, only the 2 I just mentioned, I'll call them the kissy tape and the huggy tape, relate directly back to the new chapter, to Chapter 3. The kissy tape literally shows up when Poppy shows us the Hour of Joy, and the huggy tape loosely relates back to Playcare itself, the idea that Huggy is trying to go home. But the Bron tape? he's not in Chapter 3 at all. So it's a weird decision to release a lore video with no relevance to the upcoming game alongside 2 others that actually do. So to never refer to the procedure again, or even the video, even Bron himself as a character, aside from name dropping Thomas Clark, feels super out of place. But, of course, does the video itself have any direct correlation to Ollie? Well, let's talk about it now. It's a simple one. We briefly see the surgery that put Thomas Clark into the Bron toy, as well as the claim that he willingly agreed to become a test subject after he found out he had lung cancer.
Test subject is 59-year-old Thomas Clark. 6 months ago, he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Now, Mr. Clark, of sound mind, has volunteered for this experiment.
Afterwards, they say that Thomas experienced a lot more disorientation than other experiments and that his cognitive function wasn't great. That he might not be able to tell where he is or even what happened to him.
1199 displayed much more disorientation than we expected. Subsequent mental testing metrics were also cut practically in half. It's just conjecture on my part, but I don't believe he knows where he is or what's happened to him.
Aside from this, it turns out that the other experiments can tell Thomas is much different to them.
The other experiments could tell 1199 was different.
So much so, in fact, that within minutes of being introduced to the other toys, Thomas was attacked and brutally injured, to the point where a good chunk of his internal structure was heavily damaged, his larynx and thyroid being completely destroyed.
There was still significant damage to the internal structures with some of the anatomy, namely the larynx and the thyroid, having been completely devoured.
After that, Thomas is kept separated from the others in his own containment cell. So what exactly do we learn from this video? Not a lot, but enough to support my theory. When Thomas is attacked by the other toys, he has the entirety of his larynx and thyroid destroyed, like I mentioned, which is a strange thing to call out here since these 2 muscles are directly responsible for your voice. Thomas doesn't speak in that video anyway, but if he did, then these 2 muscles being heavily injured would change the sound of your voice by quite a lot. It's those thin, delicate vibrations along your vocal cords that give you a unique voice after all. Given this information, the likelihood that Thomas still sounds like a 60-year-old man after having his vocal cords ripped out is impossible. There's also the question of how did the toys figure out this was a Playtime employee? He looked indistinguishable from all the other Bron toys, so it wasn't by how he looked. He can barely move, so it wasn't his mannerisms. All that leaves us with is how he speaks. I mean, given that most test subjects by this point are children, there's going to be a clear difference between a kid's voice and a 60-year-old man's voice. To that end, while fixing him up, Playtime Co. could have purposefully changed his voice to sound more childlike in order to trick the other toys. Circumstantial as all hell, but worth thinking about. Aside from his voice, there's also 2 other aspects to Ollie that I can explain using Thomas. The first clue is that Ollie is stationary. He only ever talks to us on the phone, can use the transport tube at will, and can somehow always see where we are, implying he has access to a local camera feed of some kind. The second clue is the contrast between his childish demeanour and his intelligence. On the one hand, he says things like,
"No ouchies or lost body parts?"
But on the other, what child would know how to work numerous pieces of sophisticated technology? The phone and transport tubes, like I said before, the screen in Catnap's boss fight, Playcare's entire goddamn power grid, and even the red smoke redirection tubes. Let's go over the first clue. The reason he isn't alongside us and communicates through the phone should be pretty clear. Because Thomas's Bron body can't move around well. Unlike toys that were made of felt and soft material, Bron is entirely plastic, restricting his movement by a lot, so he can't really interact with us besides looking through cameras and speaking. For the second clue, the reason why he behaves like a child but has much more intelligence than one is because of something I mentioned before. Aside from learning that his larynx and thyroid were destroyed in the Bron tape, we also learned that his mental faculties had declined by quite a lot. But we see that for almost every other experiment, certain memories do still remain. In Huggy's tape, right before being recaptured, Huggy stands completely stationary outside a random house. We assume this is because he wanted to go home. Even Catnap remembers things from his time as Theo, since he regards the prototype as a friend and saviour from when he was injured in the first place. Even after being experimented on, some memories do stick. Ollie behaves like a child because he basically is one. Losing most of your memories and a good piece of your mental faculties will do that to people. However, he retains his knowledge of Playcare because he was in play care. That's why he was name dropped for seemingly no reason in chapter 3. After entering the main hub area, Ollie even says,
The kids used to live here.
the language here implies that he was on the outside looking in, that he himself was not a kid. But aside from children, the only other people that knew the ins and outs of Playcare were staff members. And guess who was a pediatrician at Playcare for 40 years? Thomas was. There's also one more detail that could prove this connection, especially significant because it actually came along during the Chapter 4 ARG. Now, without getting into too much detail, I believe that Ollie is the television eye that we see in Yanabe's trailer. I'm running out of time to explain why, especially since an entire video was originally going to be dedicated to that, but to cut a long story short, I believe that Ollie/Thomas, let's just go with Tolly, I like it. I believe Tolly is related to the Young Geniuses program. Based on a lot of math that I won't bore you with, Thomas Clark was born in 1932, joined Playtime Co. in 1955, and then volunteered for the Bigger Bodies Initiative in 1991. That means he was 23 when he joined Playtime Co. And I don't know about you, but becoming a literal doctor at 23 years old in 1955 sounds like a young genius to me. There's also plenty of overlap between when Thomas was hired and the launch of the Young Geniuses program too, since the first generation Playtime Co logo is stamped on the bottom left of the flyer, used between 1930 to around the 1970s. That's my strongest semi-point, but there are also a couple more smaller points. Poppy talks about Ollie like she knows him, and I'll bet my bottom dollar Poppy wouldn't trust anyone she's not intimately familiar with in a place like this, especially since she of all people should know about the prototype's ability to mimic voices, so there's no way she would trust a random voice without knowing exactly who it belongs to. Poppy and Thomas are also two of the very few toys that took no part in the Hour of Joy carnage, especially since Thomas wasn't related to the experiments at all. We know this because he didn't recognise the prototype when he brought Theo to him. With a story like that, Thomas is probably one of the very few characters that perfectly aligns with Poppy's motivations. And that's all, folks. Honestly, I feel really good about this one. Admittedly, there are a couple of points that don't line up perfectly for me. For example, if this was Thomas, why does he use the name Ollie and not Bron or Thomas, which I don't have a perfect answer for. However, Thomas was treated far different from the other experiments because of his problems with the other toys, and so it's possible that Bron, Thomas, was kept isolated for a long time, unaware of what a Bron even was. Researchers only ever called him 1199 anyway, so it's possible Thomas just wanted to pick a better name and chose Ollie. Aside from that, if you've been around for a while now and haven't noticed yet, most of my theories stem from these 3 points. 1. They could reasonably happen in the universe we've been given. 2. There's enough evidence, often through inference, to support my claims. And 3. Perhaps the most important of them all, it's fun. Nobody likes to guess the twist to a story. It kills the wonder. And if it's too predictable, you don't even need to try all that hard to do it. That's why my theories are kinda random, because they're a fun alternative to what will more likely happen. So don't take this theory, or any of them, too seriously. If one of mine turns out to be true though, I am going to make it everyone's problem. And you can count on that. Join me for the ride if you fancy, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.